And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. Welcome to Benchley Night. I'm wearing my elbows up t-shirt. Don't know if you can see that. There it is, elbows up. That was gifted to me by one of my Canadian friends. I got gifted 2 elbows up t-shirts. That's pretty darn good. Now, the ironic thing about this elbows up t-shirt is that when I was putting it on, I looked at the label, and the label said, "America Strong, made in the USA, no, made in Nicaragua from American USA components." It's a crazy world, ladies and gentlemen. It's a crazy world. Hi, Terry Hudson. Hey, did you have the tailgaters out today, or was the team elsewhere today? What did you posted something really good. About the museum, about the museum in St. Louis. That is a crazy museum. Any of you ever traveling to St. Louis, check with Terry about that museum in St. Louis. It's wacko. Hey, hi, artists. Anyway, let's see. Yesterday we had our Celebrate American Democracy celebration here in Bellows Falls on the anniversary of the day of the shot heard around the world. And in our town of 2,700 and something people, we had 485, and we know we had 485 because the woman with OCD. Now, I do get OCD a little mixed up with AOL and AOC, but this woman was walking through the crowd with a clicker, and she said, "I have OCD and I have a clicker." And she clicked off every person who was there. And it was 485 in a town of 2,700. So we're pretty stoked about that. Fight the power, ladies and gentlemen. Fight the power. And up there in Canada, my Canadian friends, vote Carney. Vote Carney. Don't vote Poilievre. Bad. Anyway, it is a joy to have you all here. And we have 2 Robert Benchleys tonight because they're pretty short. They're pretty short. We need to take our minds away from the troubles of this world. So join me now for the camel market. The New South Wales correspondent for the International News Service forwards the disquieting news that a man named Manning living in Newcastle, New South Wales, has just bought a camel at auction for the small sum of 1.25 pounds, or I'm sorry, I'm reading, I guess it's US dollars, for the small sum of $1.25 or 5 shillings. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at this. 5 shillings is not 5 shillings is not a good price for a camel, even though these are not boom days. In fact, it comes under the head of starvation prices. The camel market in New South Wales must be glutted. It is more than likely that this was, the camel market in New South Wales cannot be glutted. It is more than likely that this was the only camel in the country. What price recovery if an exclusive camel drags down only 5 shillings at an auction? On the other hand, the affair has its brighter side. The camel was the property of the Shire Council, which had impounded it. The correspondent does not say how it happened to be there for the Shire Council to impound, but there may have been a previous story that I didn't catch. The fact that the camel was put up at auction at all shows that the Shire Council felt that things were picking up in the Newcastle district. They could have just ignored the whole thing. I wish there'd been more about the auction itself. Just what is the selling talk for a camel in New South Wales? How would an auctioneer go about stimulating frantic bidding? Good afternoon. Here is a camel. Then what? much am I bid for this marvelous camel, denizen of the desert, the Arabian's best friend, sometimes called the crouching horse of sandy land? How much am I bid for this indispensable pet? Look at him, gentlemen. Mount him if you wish. No, my good man, not that way. You face front. That's right. Is that a mount not worth owning? Tell the gentleman what you see from up there. The ocean? You hear, gentlemen? Mr. Manning says that he can see the ocean from his seat on the camel. Isn't that something? Isn't it? Do I hear 4 shillings? Mr. Manning from atop the camel. 4 shillings. Fine, 4 shillings are bid for this exquisite camel. Do I hear 5? Mr. Manning. 5 shillings. Oh, good. Mr. Manning has bid 5 shillings against himself. Do I hear 6? Going at 5 shillings. Sold to Mr. Manning for 5 shillings. Mr. Manning pays his 5 shillings and rides off. The next news story we'll be looking for is what Mr. Manning did with his camel. That's a very good one. I've never read that one before. All right, our second story. Let's have one more story, ladies and gentlemen. Let's have one more story. It is only 7:53. That was but like a 4-minute story. I've read this one before, but it's springtime and it feels like it bears repeating. Trout Fishing by Robert Benchley. I never knew very much about trout fishing anyway, and I certainly had no inkling that a trout fisher had to be so deceitful until I read Trout Fishing in Brooks by G. Garrow Green. The thing is appalling. Evidently, the sport is nothing but a constant series of compromises with one's better nature, what with sneaking about, pretending to be something that one is not, trying to fool the fish into thinking one thing or another when just the reverse is true, and in general behaving in an underhanded and tricky manner throughout the day. The very first, and evidently the most important exhortation in the book is, quote, whatever you do, keep out of sight of the fish. Now, I ask you, is that open and above board? Is that honorable? Quote, trout invariably Trout invariably lie in running water with their noses pointed against the current, and therefore whatever general chance of concealment there may be rests in fishing from behind them. The moral is that the brook angler must both walk and fish upstream. End quote. It seems as if a lot of trouble might be saved the fisherman in case he really didn't want to walk upstream but had to get to some other point downstream before 8 o'clock to adopt some disguise which would deceive the fish into thinking that he had no intention of catching them anyway. A pair of blue glasses and a cane would give the effect of the wearer being blind and harmless, and could be thrown aside very quickly when the time came to show one's true self in true colors to the fish. If there were 2 anglers, they might talk in loud tones about their dislike for fish in any form, and then, when the trout were quite reassured and swimming close to the bank, they can suddenly be shot with a pistol. But a little further on comes a suggestion for a much more elaborate bit of subterfuge. The author says that in the early season, trout are often engaged with larvae at the bottom and do not show on the surface. It is then a good plan, he says, To sink the flies well, moving in short jerks to moving in short jerks to imitate nymphs. You can see that imitating a nymph will call for a lot of rehearsing, but I doubt very much if moving in short jerks is the way to go about it. I have never actually seen a nymph, though if I had, I should not be likely to admit it. And I can think of no possible way in which I could give an adequate illusion of being one myself. Even the most stupid of Trout could easily divine that I was masquerading, and then the question would immediately arise in his mind, if he's not a nymph, then what is his object in going about like that, trying to imitate one? He is up to no good, I'll be bound. And crash, away would go that trout before I could put my clothes back on. There's an interesting note on the care and feeding of worms on page 67. 150 worms are placed in a tin and allowed to work their way down into packed moss. Quote, a little fresh milk poured in occasionally is sufficient food, says Mr. Green, in the style of Dr. Holt. So disposed, the worms soon become bright, lively, and tough, end quote. It is easy to understand why one should want to have bright worms, so long as they don't know that they're bright and try to show off before company. But why deliberately set out to make them tough? Good manners they may not be expected to acquire, but a worm with cultivated vulgarity sounds intolerable. Imagine 150 very tough worms all crowded together in one tin. Chaos is the only word to describe it. I suppose it's my ignorance of fishing parlance which makes the following sentence a bit hazy. Quote, much has been written about bringing a fish downstream to help drown it, as no doubt it does. Still, this is often impracticable, end quote. I can think of nothing more impracticable than trying to drown a fish under any circumstances, upstream or down. But I suppose that Mr. Garrow Green knows what he's talking about. And in at least one of his passages, I follow him perfectly. In speaking of the time of day for fly fishing in the spring, he says, quote, carpe diem is a good watchword when trout are in the humor, end quote. At least I know a good pun when I see one. All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, that is Benchley night for tonight. You know what I was thinking would be a good Benchley to read next week is Opera Synopses. It is probably the all-time best, Robert Benchley. We haven't read it for a year or two, and why not? I've been here for several weeks, and I'll be heading out to go teach a class down in South Carolina. Go see Lindsey Graham while I'm down there. So we've only got a couple more Benchley nights before we take a little break. And I thought that'd be a good one to read again. Opera Synopses. Wait for it, ladies and gentlemen. It is now time to read the list of supporters of our Substack, i.e. our mailing list. If you've got other things to do now, you can go do them, unless you want to hear me read a bunch of names and see if the unidentified ungulate McCann works this week. Oh, it's working. It's working. However, my very, very tall cousin and their little dog and his wife Elise and their very little dog Ginger were kind enough to give me a battery powered, but it's very identifiable, this ungulate. But we'll start with it. I'll just kind of have it going like this. This will be a new way of doing it. We have to thank Mary Graham, Magic Starheart, Cece Danforth, Kay McDonough, Melinda Weingartner, Peggy Weed, Jane S. Morgan, Dexelrod, Wing and Wing, MP Schmid, Linda Marquez. And that's enough of that one. We're going to go back to the one we like better. Catherine Fisher, Susan McNeil, Sonia Jackson, Christina Stockman, Terry Widener, Bree Dodson, Elizabeth Swartz, Lizzie Grosso, Adele Reichert, Christine Marks, Kate Fry, John T. Wilhelm, Deborah Lovett, Jean Fry, James Gilbreth, Marlon Gibson, Ann Cousins, Carol Burning, Helen Sixek, Nancy Radzik, MJ Brush, Cindy Baker, Nancy Bass, Rhea Bruns, Jeb Hart, Busy Graham, Nancy Flanagan, Susan McCullough, Kathleen Bartlett, Sharon Allen, Sandy Like the Beach Daniel, Scott Jones, Susan Dalton, Jimmy Malley, Nancy Teagarden Weidman, David Erlanger, Mike Steele, Bob Manning, Don Anderson, Lincoln Payne, Sue Kibbe, Martha Rowley, Laura Brown, and out there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, out there sending me identifiable unglets is my very, very tall cousin, Mr. Nat Hunter, his wonderful wife Elise, and their wee dog, Ginger. Keep fighting the good fight, ladies and gentlemen. Next week, opera synopses. You take care. Bye-bye.